Welcome to Mental Performance Unleashed with Emily Heird.
Hey everyone, welcome back to an all-new episode of Mental Performance Unleashed with Emily Heird. I am your host, Mike Leon. Emily here is a licensed psychotherapist and certified mental performance mastery coach, and she's been helping attorneys and legal leaders perform at a high level without burning out. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about playing your position. That's something that athletes always hear. And just like elite athletes, lawyers can protect their mental energy by focusing on their specific roles. Emily's going to explain what cognitive bandwidth is. I have no idea what that is. She's going to explain it. Why role clarity boosts performance and how attorneys can delegate, stay focused, and sustain peak performance. All right, Emily, it's good to see you as always. Happy New Year to you and yours. What the heck does cognitive bandwidth mean in the context of legal work?
It's great to see you again, Mike. Happy New Year's to you as well. Yeah, so cognitive bandwidth, you want to think about in terms of this is like almost a biological bank account for our attention and our focus each day and our energy levels each day. So every morning when you wake up, you have like a finite amount of currency in this bank account in your prefrontal cortex. And in the legal world, or for all of the knowledge workers that I work with, this currency is what allows the lawyers to analyze complex case law, to maintain emotional regulation during high stakes moments or difficult conversations, and also to have that level of moral courage to make difficult leadership decisions. So processing information, making decisions, sustained focus, all of this withdraws from that bank account. You can think about it in terms of a bank account, or another common metaphor is a battery. So the problem is that most attorneys treat their cognitive bandwidth like it's an unlimited data plan. But the brain is a biological organ, so it has a ceiling. And so when we talk about the cognitive bandwidth, we're talking about the mental space really to move from being busy to being effective. It's also talking about respecting your capacity and not operating in a zone of cognitive overload every day. So when your bandwidth is cluttered, or when you're operating in the overload zone, then you're not just tired. Like, yes, you feel tired and you're overstressed and you're fatigued, but you are actually over capacity. So it's a biological thing, not necessarily a moral thing, or being lazy or not working hard enough.
Well, Emily, in the intro, I mentioned about athletes and how, you got to know your role on the team, right? So let's talk a little bit about the role clarity that I mentioned. What is that? Why is role clarity in the legal profession so important for the performance angle?
Yeah, certainly. So, we understand that if a wide receiver gets onto the field and they're trying to play the offensive line, they're not really being helpful in that situation. They're creating a liability because their skills, they're not trained. Their body isn't set up for that position. They're not trained for that position. So it's ultimately going to hurt the team's performance and potentially also hurt the wide receiver in that performance. So when players are out of position, then the whole system is not performing as well as possible. In the legal fields and in other corporate arenas, the perception sometimes is that the most valuable person is the one that does the most. And I see this with my clients who are building and running law firms. They have multiple positions or multiple roles that they need to master. And that's, being ineffective overall in their performance. So we really focus on hiring roles and bringing in people who it is their area of expertise for marketing. It is their area of expertise for admin or client onboarding. So then the lawyer can stay in their zone of genius as often as possible and offload and delegate to people who are trained and have mastered those roles. I also see this in clients who are leaders in general. They don't want to, they overfunction because they like being helpful, but then that creates a bottleneck in the work. And they aren't helping other players develop by giving them the answer all the time or just doing work for them out of fear that it's not going to get done correctly. And so, science tells us that ambiguity is actually a big psychological stressor. And so, when you're not clear on your role or you are overextending into other roles where it's not your area of expertise, then that increases the stress response. So, when we have clarity on that, we are more able to be in the present moment, focused on that specific job that only you can do. In client meetings, you can focus more on the high-level legal strategy because you have an onboarding specialist who's going to handle all the minor details that are needed for the administrative side of things.
Emily, you mentioned the over word, so I want to go into overextending because it sounds like a lot of the times lawyers are overextending themselves by doing all of these multiple roles, like you mentioned. But how have you seen lawyers, with respect to your practice, like unintentionally drain their mental energy by overextending themselves?
Certainly. So, this usually happens with like invisible cognitive leakage. A great example of this is a lawyer client of mine in New York City. When we first started out, she thought that this was really a time management problem. But when we started to look at the whole picture, colleagues love to come in, knock on her door, ask her questions. Hey, do you have a minute? And she loved to answer the questions and to be helpful. Lots of lawyers have some people pleasing tendencies in them, so it's difficult for them to say no. And so we found that she was spending, 90 minutes to 2 hours a day answering these not basic, but answering these questions from colleagues instead of encouraging them to try to figure it out on their own and reclaiming her time and energy that she needed to devote for her casework. Which resulted in pushing back work to evenings and the weekends. And so, we look at all these different areas where invisible energy is leaking. Another common one is going into your email to look for one email and respond to that email. And then you see all these other emails that need your attention and you get distracted with all the other emails in your inbox. So every time, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but every time you are task switching from interruptions, or you get a Slack message or a client texts you, then you are paying a mental tax for that. And every time you are doing a task that someone else could own, whether it's because it's their role or because they need to develop the skills and capabilities, then you are also paying for that with a mental task.
Emily, let me stay on that for a second. In that scenario, how can attorneys identify, or how did she identify which task deserve the best mental energy?
Yeah, so really, we have to think about. I encourage people to stop trying to manage time, and we start to manage energy. So again, coming back to energy determines where our focus and attention goes. Number one is looking at all tasks and making sure, am I the correct person to be doing this task? If the answer is you have an assistant and they don't, your billable hour doesn't need to be going towards doing administrative work, then it is delegating that task. But we also look at how energy is distributed throughout the day because it's not created equal throughout the day. In the morning, our brain is at the sharpest and is best suited to do that deep work. So a lot of lawyers spend their prime mental energy on answering emails at 8 a.m. in the morning. So we kind of design a performance matrix. We look at things through the lens of different tiers when it comes to cognitive load. Tier 1 is going to be like deep analysis, strategic work, drafting. That requires 100% mental energy. The second tier might be, client meetings or negotiations. This tier requires, focus and attention and processing, but also higher levels of emotional energy at times. And then tier 3 is going to be the administrative stuff, email, logistics, admin. It's low cognitive load. So when structuring days, when possible, maximizing the type of cognitive energy required with the tier. So doing your deep work in the morning, being strategic about when you schedule client meetings, and then reserving lower level tasks for later in the afternoon when our brain is naturally depleted with energy.
Emily, let me ask you something you just said a moment ago about like we talked about overextending, right? Some lawyers will wear multiple hats at the firm. They're doing marketing, they're doing all these things. But what's kind of like the mental cost of constantly switching roles throughout the day, especially as you're you're trying to start up this firm and you're wearing all these different hats?
Yeah, so when science shows that when we're task switching back and forth, it is very expensive. When you are switching from case A to an HR issue, then back to case A, your brain is still kind of stuck thinking about that HR issue, and it takes 7 to 23 minutes to get back to where you were on the case work. So you can do this a few times throughout the day, but over time, this really erodes your focus and erodes your patience. It's expensive from an emotional and a cognitive perspective. That emotional perspective, again, because the same area of our brain is in charge of our emotional regulation. So the cost of constantly switching roles is it is really draining your mental energy battery faster than you could if you were a little bit more strategic about focus, matching the type of task with the time of day and the type of role you're playing with that task as well.
So, staying with that, then, let me ask you about you outlined a few of them, but when you meet a new client, right? What are some systems, some habits you're helping them kind of form that keep them to stay focused on core responsibilities, especially when, like you mentioned, these unexpected tasks pop up, client demands show up. Hey, can I grab you for a second? Like, what are some systems and habits you start to build with them to help them stay focused?
Yeah, so one of the first things that we do is we start getting in the habit of planning out their days and their weeks. We make the plan and we work the plan. Now, I'm fully aware that it doesn't always go according to plan, but without the plan, we're more likely to be reactive, just responding to whatever is coming our way through our email or through what everyone else's agenda is for us. We're also more likely to gravitate towards those low-hanging fruit tasks that make us feel productive, but they're not actually moving the needle in what needs to get done. So planning out their time, identifying the 3 MITs, most important tasks, that if nothing else got done, these are the 3 or sometimes the 1 thing that when I leave the office, if this is done, then I will feel a sense of accomplishment. So that's one major shift that I help my clients make.
Emily, as we put a bow on today's episode, for the potential leader or lawyer that's listening to this right now, how would you advise them to design roles that can help reduce this unnecessary mental overload and challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, so if you're a leader in a firm, you really want to be maximizing the skills of your team players and giving them autonomy over their role. So if you're the type of leader that is leading with fear and you tend to micromanage and you expect a response from your employee within 3 minutes of sending an email, and yes, I've worked with clients on both sides of this equation, then that is designing a work environment that makes it really challenging from a biological perspective for people to do deep focused work. So designing roles of ownership, allowing them autonomy in that process from start to finish, setting up milestones for the process. For example, do you want them to come to you with an outline before they complete the entire brief, or do you want them to finish it and then get it to you by a certain date? Not checking in, but being available. Also setting that expectation. If they have a question, do you want them to come to you right away, or do you want them to spend 2 hours trying to figure it out and then come to you? So clearly communicating the expectations about this process. But if both people are clear on what the expectations are and where the check-ins are going to be, that's going to reduce friction on both sides, and it's going to give them autonomy to own their role. You want a high trust, high clarity environment.
Emily, thank you so much for the time, the insights, breaking this all down for us. I appreciate it as always.
Thank you, Mike.
And that's it for today's episode of Mental Performance Unleashed with Emily Heird. We talked today about obviously cognitive bandwidth, playing your position, clarifying the roles, delegating intentionally. It can help you perform more consistently and pretty much extend your career without burning out. We don't want to burn out, right? So if you want more practical science-backed strategies to strengthen your mental fitness, you want to operate more like an intellectual athlete, do me a favor, visit Emily at vantageviewcoaching.com today. Before you go, do me a favor as well. Like, subscribe, leave a review and comment, or share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. I'm Mike Leon. We will see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.